Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, is much more than a daily report. Okay, it's really is a knowledge platform from which we communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through, yes, the daily reports, but also these podcasts, and we do webinars and hopefully some live events in the future. So along with our chief strategist, Shelley Kohan, who, by the way, is also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our weekly podcast. And today's topic is the truth about fashion's digital transformation. And today, we are honored to have a conversation with Janice Wang, CEO of Alvanon. Janice, you're great. I'm glad you're here. So could you start us off with telling our listeners about Alvanon and what you've been working on over the past few years? And I must say that the technology you and your family have developed since inception has completely changed the industry. So give us a little bit of background here.
Firstly, thank you, Robin and Shelley, for having me on the podcast. Alvanon is a fashion tech company, and we're focused on the body and its application in the apparel industry. So we use all the data and all our expertise from working in the industry to determine data-driven sizing strategies for brands and retailers worldwide. So what that means for the layman is that we help brands figure out what their sizes, like small, medium, or large, should be. And our most used tool is a fit mannequin. This is both physical and digital. The digital twin has the exact measurements of the physical form, and this is used in different 3D software platforms. So these avatars can look like real humans, but have the attributes of a fitting mannequin, and then they're used throughout the product development and production chain. And so because of what we do, we see all the digital transformation that is happening at the retailer, the brand, the sourcing office, and at the manufacturing vendors, but not only from a strategic level, but also from a very granular level. So if you imagine, if you do not use our digital avatars, but you use our physical mannequins, we know kind of what state of digital transformation you are currently in, down to the product level. And so our fears are this, in the next few years, retailers and brands have to make much less product. They've got to sell for higher prices. They've got to make better inventory choices. And in order so that they have a better, healthier bottom line, right? So the years of growth are over. So, but at the same time, what we haven't seen is we have not yet seen the investment that's required in the digital realm to allow for solid foundations to be built for the future.
Well, I think right now the industry's had a real wake-up call these past 2 years. The overproduction of goods, supply chain challenges, and now this overstock situation that's going to rob profits right out from the fourth quarter. Retailers are really desperate to get out of this current inventory position. They're so desperate, they're willing to give up on margin. And we both know, all three of us know, that's not sustainable for very long.
Yeah, but boy, it is coming, isn't it? What do they say? Winter is coming. So, Shelley, you and I have been talking about supply chain ad nauseum, over the past 2 years, and the issues surrounding it really just seem to be expanding in their complexity. The disequilibrium of supply and demand, which, oh my gosh, I've been writing about that for years. And it just continues. So the key question for our industry, I think, is whether we can produce and sell less, yet be more profitable. And of course, while we're doing that, can we actually be more sustainable and responsible to our planet, by producing less waste? Ouch. Janice, I am sure you have a point of view on this issue.
Well, of course, the answer of all of those questions is yes. right? Um, and we've always taken the view that if you are going to be sustainable, it means you actually have to be efficient. And this starts with placing an emphasis on devising mid to long-term plans that aim to solve your operational inefficiencies. I think brands have to be collaborative, and they have to be collaborative not only internally within their siloed divisions, but also externally, right, with their trading houses and supply chain and their manufacturers and all of the technology partners, meaning the PLM and the 3D partners, design, merchandise, assortment, inventory controls, right? But I think really there are three areas that really need to be addressed within these individual organizations. And firstly, they need much more transparency between the entire organization and the supply base. And that has to be collaborative. And secondly, you need much more training in substantive technical talent, meaning 3D artists and 3D production, merchandise assortment and kind of AI, and supply chain. Half these people have never seen factories before. And then you also have to actually put much more investment in process transformation.
Yeah.
So,
Janice, you and I have talked about this also quite a bit. Collaboration and, integration really across the board and across all functions. So it certainly does breed, richer output. And you've been great about this aspect of the business. And I agree that retailers and brands really need to put some capital in process and digital transformation. And one more thing, as you and I have said, this has got to start at the top. They have to understand they aren't the doers, they're not the people who are going to get it done, but they got to put their signature on, we are going to do this, correct?
yes, absolutely.
But there are a lot of challenges our industry is facing this year, and at a time when we thought we would be in full recovery mode, from the pandemic. So can you comment on some of the major challenges in the fashion industry as you see them?
We wasted a good crisis.
Right.
I love
And
that.
so where we're at is here. We are at consumer appetite for discretionary spending is going to go down fast. Cost of goods is going to rise incredibly. Maybe you're not going to see it this Christmas because we've got so much inventory. So there's so much discounting. So people are going to forget. But next year, it's going to be a bloodbath, right? And then on top of this, every company has a requirement for being sustainable on ESG guidelines, which actually nobody knows how to fulfill at this point. And then the fourth point, of course, is you have all this cryptocurrency, bubble that just blew up. But there was this whole incredible thing that happened during that time, which was all of this digital fashion, for the metaverse, right? So we're in this situation for brands where they actually have to go back to some pretty fundamentals, right? You have to look at your product strategy to make sure you have right product, right price, right time, right quantity.
Wow, that's so interesting, Janice, that the foundational principles that have stayed the same for centuries. Right product, right price, right time, right quantity, right location. Yet the industry is far from where it was even 50 years ago. So, digital transformation, it's here to stay, and it has to include product development. I would say we're just really on the fringes of an explosive time for digitizing product development. So what are your main concerns in the retail's journey for digital transformation, and what prevents the industry from being transparent in this road to digitization?
Well, okay. So I think foundational principles are basically taken for granted, right? Because most companies think that they have these great foundational principles, and at the same time, they actually somewhat forget to evolve them. And so then on top of that, then you have all of these new people coming into the company, because then, and it comes in then there becomes also this tension between kind of what the new people want to think and what the old guard do. And so what we find sometimes is like Alvanon becomes some of the institutional memory for some of these legacy brands. Because we've seen so many rotations of the executive board, right? So, but then what I think is foundation, and this is true for every apparel brand there, right? Your 3D journey has to start with you actually knowing who your customer is and what that size set looks like. You have to know what those sizes are, right? And so you have to develop these virtual bodies that also can be physical, right? That are what you build your garments on. And so we call these fit standards. I mean, this is kind of 101 here. And what it means is that you can build consistent. I don't care anything about anything but consistency, right? Well-fitting garments in a very industrial setting. And we tend to forget that we're actually building industrial kind of goods here. You know, because of this fundamental tiny part that what we do, we actually, we're this tiny little part of a very much bigger whole. And so what we see is that some brands, you know, their road to digitization is currently done by executives who might not have full transparency into the entire supply and demand chain, right? Or into the granularity of what some people have to do. So when you don't have that, you have no buy-in, because executives could spend 18 months and saying, hey, we're doing a digital transformation here, right? But the people who are actually doing the work actually then have to implement that strategy within a very short period of time. And we all know that process change is hard, right?
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Then you get these people who actually do the granular work, right? And then they also start to hold up some of the strategy because they get fixated on one small thing that they think actually will have a very, very large impact. And so, and they also have no buy-in. So they don't want to do it anyway. Right? So
yeah, you know, that's what I just said before, Janice, and you and I have talked about this. There's got to be a buy-in, and from the very top. So what long-term strategies, Janice, does the industry need to build around product creation and development strategies?
okay, so this is going to sound quite trite, actually. But I think we actually need to create ecosystems, right, around product creation and development strategies that operate both successfully and sustainable in real world situations, right? So there's one side. And at the same time, you have to also be preparing for this next stage of the digital revolution. Because somewhere, you know, in the summer of 21 and 22, we saw all of the oxygen get sucked out of the room by the metaverse fashion marketing plays, right?
Yeah.
Quick fix, quick buck, right?
Yep.
Because up revenue. And so the real digitization work, right, got no investment because of this marketing play. But what it did do was it brought in a lot of new talent that we didn't see beforehand, and it brought in some super sexiness to like this digital revolution. So now people want to be part of it because they saw that play. So I think it was, you know, it was a good thing as well. But at the same time, what we actually have to realize here is we're not building digital clothing only for the metaverse or for gaming. You know, we're at this stage where revenue is still generated from selling real clothing in real life. And so therefore, you have to take all of the strategies and try to build production-ready digital garments. So make it a fundamental step. And that allows you to utilize all of your digital garments in different stages, not only in the product life cycle, but in the marketing life cycle, right? And so the key to this successful digital product strategy is to build assets once, and then leverage it many times. And then it becomes much more critical that your digital product development is done with production, physical production ready mindset from the very beginning. in the past 3 years, I think what we've seen is this up ramp, right, of a lot of our clients realize that they have to do this. It started at the start of the pandemic, and they have to take this approach to the digital pipeline. So you'll see some winners and losers in this game.
Yeah, Janice, Tim Cook, of course, CEO of Apple, said he doesn't see metaverse happening. But, I know there's just too many other smart people who say it will eventually. Anyway, but that aside, the shift towards digital design strategies, has meant that it has created a circular, collaborative workflow that gives visibility, transparency to everyone in the product development lifecycle much sooner. So essentially, the business is moving away from a physical sample workflow, which was incredibly wasteful, and now relies entirely on one action happening before another one can happen in a more linear fashion, right?
Yeah, I think, there's been a huge shift, right, from physical samples to a much more fluid workflow. Actually, if you ask any sourcing person, they actually were very fluid beforehand too, because they're always waiting for various things to happen anyway. But I think one of the big things that we see is that, I'll give you an example of what happened, right? We have one brand that basically completely changed the way it had to operate in order to kind of meet these expectations. And it's Gap Inc., right? And the scale of the strategy, no matter what you think of Gap Inc., okay? The scale of the strategy is not to be underestimated, because it's been rolled out across all 4 brands, but also across all of these vendors and across 25 countries, and mills and everybody that's in this. So it becomes much more collaborative. And there's this partnership that's built with a collaborative workflow, right? The business has more visibility earlier on in the pipeline, and and you can take all of that information and you can pass it to your marketing team, to your photography team, to your web team, and most importantly, you can pass it to your customers, which means that you can get into a circular feedback loop. And that's where everybody wants to get to, a circular feedback loop.
Well, it's interesting, like many other areas of our fashion industry, the fashion business is working in a very kind of siloed way. And that kind of limits the ability and levels of collaboration, especially when it comes with working with vendors. The business kind of pushes information out to them. But this legacy thinking is changing now, hopefully.
Well, I hope to, because ultimately we really should be looking at this entire end-to-end process much more holistically, right? And this is not initial upfront savings from just the cost of developing a product, but it actually has much more deeper unintended consequences, which what it means for the whole entire garment industry. We actually need to be much more sustainable. All of these little tiny micro kind of decisions that get made. I mean, from things like, please extend your collar by 1/4 of an inch, something like that, right? These are micro decisions that are happening. They've got all of these ramifications that like flow down the line that create much more wastage, much more unsustainable, right? And so we've got to get to a much more efficient decision-making process.
Yeah, by viewing, the process in a holistic manner, as you say, it really opens up other opportunities and even new markets, right? For example, in the past few years, we have seen more growth in inclusive and underserved markets like body inclusive, or what used to be referred to as plus size, for example. In other words, it seems to me that inclusiveness could also expand to producing product for people with disabilities. So, which I believe, excuse me, is a huge market opportunity. I believe brands are really starting to look at this market segment. So What's your take on that, Janice?
So I think that this is a market that's hugely underserved, right? Because they haven't actually had the ability to produce single unit items or actually less product. And a lot of this has to do with the way that we were producing it beforehand. I think Coresight expects like kind of the spending on adaptive apparel to be about 1.3 billion in 2022. And that's like,
Wow.
and the whole market size is something like 60 something billion. But that means it's a super underserved market, right? And one of the things that actually we have to recognize is that people have to be able, consumers want to see themselves in the clothing that they're buying, and they have to also have, you know, special abilities to use. So it actually is basically functional apparel. And part of this is that when you can't really visualize yourself, you are unable to buy something. And so actually having something, one of our great partners is Kevin Wilson, and what he actually created with the Down Syndrome International was he actually created a digital influencer that was generated out of many different faces that took from, he worked with people with Down syndrome to create this digital influencer called Cami.
Love it.
And I think this is really going to change the way that people feel about this, because they can immediately see themselves in the garments. And we had another, one of our friends actually described how he was able to use 3D. This was Craig Crawford. He was able to use 3D to actually design product to show actually how it would sit on a special body that was, you know, made for somebody with Down syndrome. So there's a lot of these kind of digital aspects that are actually helping to fuel the revolution in kind of making garments that actually are functional for use. With regards to the plus size market, I think one of the big things is that you have to be not only size inclusive, but you have to be able to have sizing standards that actually reflect all of these different populations. And then you actually have to be able to visualize yourself in it, because I'm sorry, somebody who is a size 18 does not want to see themselves in something that looks good in a size 2, right? They want to see how they look in that, you know, and that's hugely important, and digital allows you to do that.
Well, that's so interesting. And I'm sure data analytics has to play a huge part of the digital pipeline and, you know, building out the assets. How has the fashion sector been able to leverage big data to help make better decisions? And businesses are moving into next phase of demand forecasting and bringing more data sources to create a holistic view of demand.
Right. So this is part, I mean, I think basically more data sources do not equal to better data insight. Yeah. The role of the role, this is something that the brands should actually recognize. So part of it is figuring out what data you actually have, right? And then once you want that, you actually also want to say, what data insight do I actually need to use, right? And so a lot of, you've got way too many data sources at this point. And eventually, basically, AI algorithms are going to outperform humans' forecasting abilities. But there's a tension in that, because everybody wants to say, I mean, hey, I'm going to forecast better than the computer. I mean, that's the general feeling that, you know, one person has, right? And so you get resistance against it. And then at the same time, what we actually have to change, you know, merchants' feelings about is that this should be much more an AI facilitated kind of decision making, rather than seeing the AI as competition. It's as if it's like augmented intelligence, right?
Love that phrase.
So it wasn't coined by me, that's all I say. But during 3D Tech Fest, so we had a Harvard Business School professor, her name's Chris Ferreira. And Chris says that in her research, right, one of the things that she's trying to figure out is there's a huge gap in success between these two ways of forecasting, you know, AI forecasting versus human forecasting. And it comes down to the space between public versus private information. And private information is like stuff that a human can tell, like, for instance, like, you know, pink is over and green is going to be the next cool color, right? And so you're going to forecast more into green, but the AI is not going to be able to tell that because it's looking at previous data or whatever. So what you want to do is you want to augment all of this information, and then you want to get inside your product development and actually get inside the circular system so that what you can actually see in demand is going to flex your production capability. So that's the most ideal situation possible. So, and so some people are going to say, hey, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. But I can tell you, actually, it is happening. And it is happening for one of the largest sustainable brands, which is Patagonia, right? And yes, it's not the most trendy and fashion, company that's out there, but one of the things that it does do is it takes all of the information that it has and it puts it into kind of a grid, you would say, right? And it allows, it allows for there to be multiple dimensions of information, like both not only item level, style, color, size, store, day, and then at the same time also using media channels, right, of private information that's coming in here. And so you have scenario specific things using these algorithms, and the forecasts are 30% better than human forecasts. So you can still hit the system, but the forecasts are already going to be better. And what this allows you to do is that you actually are able to adapt these kinds of models for shorter 2-week production, or even 9-month long cycles for some of your like long-term fabrics that you actually have. And you adapt these models to actually work with both the supplier and the demand chain, and actually all works together. And this was the case that came through with our friends at 7th on 9, which is a very, it showed that it actually could happen, and it can happen now.
Janice, you guys have really developed a gold mine of global data. And I'd like to shift gears here a little bit and talk about an event that you and I had recently. Remember, we interviewed Denise Incandela, who's the EVP Apparel Division and Private Brands for Walmart US. And she revealed the latest innovation it is launching with its virtual try-on experience for online shoppers. So Janice, this is your wheelhouse. Can you give our audience some of the key takeaways from that session with Denise?
So last year they bought a company called Zkit. And what they have been doing is they've been trying to finesse and develop these algorithms and machine learning models powered by like Walmart global technology. And in the first implementation, they actually did this thing called Choose My Model. The customer actually gets to select a model that looks like them to actually show the clothing. And the virtual try-on experience is now evolved to allow the customer to upload a photo of them and see what that clothing looks on them, right? It's called Be On Model, basically. And the customer can choose across like something like 300,000 items on Walmart.com.
Wow.
So we know that people love seeing garments on themselves. It's like a game, and I mean that's happened since time immemorial. Like I mean, my daughter, I remember playing with like the little dolls where you stick on like clothing onto them. It's kind of the same thing, right? But what we're actually working on, so Alvanon is also working to create a much more holistic solution with them, because I remember very much in the past we talked about these digital building a digital asset, and building it once and leveraging it many times. And so what we actually think is you can take something like that and power virtual try-on apps, right? So my brother's actually saying that there's really this opportunity to integrate many more elements once you have this front end, something like a Zkit, and when you've actually developed all of your digital assets in the background with the Alvanon body at its core. Because then what you can do is you can bridge this gap between like the current and what is going to be in the future. And what actually that happens is that the consumer can match themselves to one of the sizes and then be able to both see what it looks like on them and also buy the right size.
It's so interesting. So consumers, the first thing they're drawn to is style and look at the garment. You see something, you like it, and then you say, okay, let's see if it's in my size, and then let's try it on to see if it fits. It's really the last decision they make
Yes.
before making a purchase, but it's actually one of the most important decisions. So last year, Jason, he's also COO of Alvanon. He and I talked about virtual sizing apps. I wrote an article in the Robin Report, and he was one of my big sources. And he was, this idea of building a digital avatar is great. It just hasn't been like widely adopted by the industry or even consumers.
So, there's a reason for this, right? So the technology for predicting and building consumer digital avatars has to be much simpler than it is today. It has to be much more accurate too, right? Or else you're going to have no mass adoption. And so there's a lot of drawbacks to this currently, because you probably need we need more computing power, and
Right.
we need faster algorithms to perform very real-time simulations, right? Because people want things immediately. We've got very short attention span these days. So, they want to be able to see it very real and true. And I think this will happen, right? Because, we've been waiting for this for 20 years, right? So we've spent the last 20 years gathering all of this body data from around the world and developing actually all of these size sets. So essentially what we can build out is to drive a thing that we call the Alvanon body engine. And so that you can actually match a person straight into an avatar, and good enough avatar, right? But actually that avatar has already been used to make certain garments. So you'd be able to match all of those things together. And so brands will be able to use kind of this tool to feed into their own proprietary, fit tool, whatever that may be. It could be Zkit, for instance, and use these to predict and recommend correct size and fit for the consumer. But we're not there yet. We all know that we're not there yet. But you have to actually start. So there's fundamentals, which we talked about much earlier in terms of product development. But if you don't, I think the thing is that industry has always wanted this quick fix, because it's fashion, right? We want things really quickly. You want it here. You don't really think about how this thing gets done. The processes. Anybody who's made a garment knows how hard it is to make a garment. You get a true appreciation for your shirt once you've sewn it. But this is the same for digital as well. And so we've got to go through all of these things to get to a place where you can be able to fuel a consumer fit technology, right? And once you have that, then you can create this feedback loop. And then it will work back into the demand prediction chain. And so we're all trying to get there. But the thing is that we had lots of disparate little pieces.
Yep.
And so what we would try to do as an industry, because we don't have very much time, is bring all of this stuff together. Because only then will we become much more sustainable and efficient.
Yeah, Janice, well, first of all, I always learn from you, as I'm sure Shelley and our audience did as well today. My final 50,000 foot takeaway, technology and its awesome leaps in changing the world, actually, and specifically in our industry's global space, continues. But as I've always said, without the ability to understand how to use it, it's really meaningless. And what we have learned today is that Alvanon, and I've known this for a while, not only has understood how to use it, you guys have really excelled to the point where, you're sharing your knowledge with the major brands and retailers around the world. So Janice, thank you so much again for enlightening us today. And please tell our audience how they can get in touch with you.
So you can get in touch with us on our website, which is www.alvanon.com, alvanon.com. Or you can, ping us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. And we'll be very, very happy to, just have a chat, see what works for you.
Thank you, Janice, so much. Again, I echo Robin's comments. I learn so much every time I talk to you. For our listeners, you can find more of our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and of course, therobinreport.com. Look for us on YouTube where we broadcast our podcast as well. And follow us on social media. Link in with us. You hear the latest about the industry.
And Janice, thanks again. You're great. And I want to thank our audience for listening in. And as I mention all the time, if you guys have any topics that you would like Shelley and I to cover, please don't hesitate to send me an email. And it is robin@therobinreport.com. And thanks everybody again.